Welcome to a very exciting night here at Liberty Baptist Church. Why don't we all stand? We are going to sing one verse of Stand Up for Jesus. So let's stand up. Then we will be taking an offering. Stand up for Jesus, ye soldiers of the cross. Lift high his royal banner. It must not suffer loss. From victory unto victory, his army shall he lead. Till every foe is vanquished, and Christ is Lord indeed. Amen.
Good evening, everybody. Man, I am so glad that you are here. Welcome, welcome, welcome. It's an honor to have you with us in services tonight. And I've seen several of my pastor friends who are here. And if you're a ministry leader here in town, I just want to thank you for being part of this special night. And we have a very special opportunity to hear from, to be honest with you, one of my childhood friends, childhood heroes, not friends. Yeah, we're together. We grew in high school. We were having such good times together. But one of my childhood heroes, and his name is David Barton. You're going to get to hear from him in a few moments. But why don't we do this? I'm going to pray. I'll let you be seated. We're going to take an offering, and then before we take the offering, I'll give you a couple of instructions so that Chad and Dave can get right into tonight. Father, we thank you for the privilege of being in your house tonight. I thank you that we get to be in America. I thank you that this country has freedoms, that we are able to speak, we are able to assemble, we're able to defend ourselves. And tonight, we are learning that those freedoms were not just a gift that happened because we got on a new land. They were bestowed upon us because men and women fought, they sacrificed, and they held to the principles of your scripture. And so tonight, we want to hear from you. We want to learn, as the people in Josiah's time, learn what the law had to say, learn what our country was founded upon. I thank you for bringing two choice servants of God to us tonight, and I pray that you would bless this time for your glory. In Jesus' name, amen. Hey, you may be seated. And as you're finding your seat, let me just say two things. First of all, if you're a pastor here in town, I see Pastor Box over here, Pastor Roybles is up here. I'm just so glad that you're here tonight. Thank you for being part of our services. And I may have missed somebody, so I hesitate to even recognize folks. But I do want you to do this. I know that we have some political candidates who I am so thankful for, men and women who are willing to serve our country. Aren't you thankful for men and women who are willing to serve our country? And I had several folks text me saying they were coming today, and I don't want to take time now to miss anybody. Like my friend Jacob who's over there. If you live up in the Desert Shores area, I can't say you should vote for Jacob. I'm just saying that's a really good guy right over there. And but you might be a political candidate, and I'm missing you, and I don't want to miss you. So would you do me a favor? In the chair in front of you is a card that says "Let's Connect," and if you would just right now give me your name and then write where your office is that you are running for, I'll make sure that we recognize you, especially towards the conclusion of tonight. It's been a whirlwind about 24 hours for me and my friends from Texas and South Carolina, respectively. When I was 12 years old, my dad would always watch television preacher James Kennedy on Sunday mornings. And we would grow up and we would listen to this Presbyterian preacher before we would get ready to go over to our Baptist church. And one day, as the last 15 minutes or so of that television show was on, he brought a fellow on who was talking about the United States of America and talking about the richness of our Constitution and the heritage that we enjoy as Christians here in the United States of America. And his writings fascinated me. My dad got several VHS videotapes, and he brought those, and we would watch those VHS videotapes. And we would learn about the fact that our country is a unique and exceptional country. Not because it's just different land than Europe or different land than some other place. It's exceptional because of the foundations we've been given. And those foundations are based upon the Word of God. I found out later that his name is David Barton. And for years, I followed his ministry and wanted to get to know him. I met him in a line of people about 12 years ago downtown when he was speaking with Newt Gingrich, the former Speaker of the House. I'm like, I got to meet David Barton. And then about 3 years ago, he was speaking at a large thing here, and I got to shake his hand and take a picture. And then last year, God brought him to our church. And I got his cell phone number, and so I text him every night now, and I just say, hey, Dave, what are you doing? And so his wife, Cheryl, and our family, we've become friends. We went and visited their ranch this summer in Texas, and he is part of a mission, and that's to tell people that faith wins in the United States of America. He's partnered with another friend of mine. His name is Chad Connolly, and Chad has been involved in the political system for decades. In fact, the very first time that I ever contributed to a political campaign was when Chad ran for Congress. I gave him a whopping check for $25 because I trust him. He didn't go to Congress, but he has gone around the country telling our story of American heritage and using the knowledge of Dr. Barton to share with this country what a great country and heritage we have. In just a few moments, Chad is going to come up and share what the purpose of Faith Wins is as an organization, but we want to pay for tonight. So I'm going to invite the ushers to come forward and receive the evening offering, and as soon as Emily's, oh, you've got a partner up there. That is Miss Armstrong that is up there. Are you playing tonight? All right, so Miss Armstrong is going to be playing. Is this your first time playing in church tonight? That's a big deal. That's a big deal. So as soon as their special is done, Chad, would you come up and share with us? I've already prayed. Let's take the offering.
Good. I don't have any of that talent, so I appreciate singing and playing musical instruments because I didn't get any of that. I can't carry a tune with a bucket. So I really appreciate talent when you find it. But thank y'all for having us. Pastor Matt, I love you, brother. I appreciate you. And he reminded me of the congressional run. I did run for Congress a few years ago. That's where I was reintroduced to the idea of rejection. Y'all know about rejection? Yep. That's when they keep score. They put all the numbers in the paper. But seriously, y'all have a pastor leader. Richard Box, another one back there. I really mean this. I appreciate pastor leadership. And I appreciate people telling truth. We're at war right now over truth. Because people say, well, that's not my truth, and I don't believe that truth. No. Truth is the truth. You don't get to selectively cherry pick what you think's comfortable or convenient. It's his truth. And so I really appreciate your leadership, guys. It means a lot to me. And David and Cheryl and I have been all over the country. In fact, we were here a year ago. Y'all probably remember we had great plans to be here early and hang out. And our flight got delayed, and we came in here on two wheels. We were glad Pastor Matt knew some law enforcement officers because we wheeled in here, and I think I came up for about 2.5 minutes, and I had to go straight back to the airport to fly home. I'm flying home tonight, too, on the red eye, but I'm not in a hurry tonight. I don't fly out till 11 something, but we're honored to be here, and this is kind of what we're doing, is trying to get out and talk to people about maximizing Christian involvement in the public arena. It's really what it's all about. And we're going to end up with 132 of these meetings in 24 states between February and November the 8th. Something's happening in November. I don't remember if it's significant, but we are committed to the idea that if Christians would just vote their values, we wouldn't have this nonsense going on in America. And far too many of us think, oh, I can't make a difference, or I don't care, or the big famous one that the media loves to say, ooh, you Christians shouldn't be involved in politics, you're going to offend somebody. And we're the ones who don't want to offend anybody. But we put on our turn the other cheek, Jesus, and we back away. And I think times sort of dictate we better find our turn the tables over Jesus. This is pure insanity, what's going on. It lacks all common sense and all historical knowledge and, of course, biblical knowledge, but we're letting it happen to us. And really, we're not losing so much as our people aren't even on the playing field. So I'm going to show you a quick video first and kind of give you a background, then I'll come back and give a short testimony, and we'll get David Barton up here. Watch this video.
What would happen if just 4 to 5% of those 30 to 40 million non-voting Christians got off the sidelines, registered to vote, and showed up at the polls? The church will have a voice.
My name is Chad Conlon. When I founded Faith Wins, it was to spread the truth that God's role in America is irreplaceable. Faith wins when people of faith vote their values. Our mission is laser focused on educating, activating, and mobilizing faith leaders, providing them with the tools, the resources, and the messaging to leverage their impact in the political and the governmental arenas. We cultivate, develop relationships with pastors who share the whole counsel of God, who stand for truth. In just a few short years, we've engaged with over 50,000 faith leaders from all 50 states. We've done hundreds of meetings with some of America's leading congressmen, senators, political thought leaders, pastors, and more. And most importantly, we've actually registered over 1 million new evangelical voters during an unprecedented time, an unparalleled success, and all accomplished with just a part-time team. People ask me all the time, what's the secret? It's God's ordained, from the pulpit to the pews, committed to faith, family, and freedom. Because with Him, all things are possible.
This is our 1776 moment.
Now more than ever, America's founding principles that were built on biblical values are under attack.
The battle for the soul of our nation has never been greater than it is today.
God has commanded us as His children to be salt and light.
America's great awakenings and revivals have always begun in the local church.
People of faith, do not underestimate your influence.
You can influence policy decisions and elect public servants with a grounded biblical view who will stand for religious freedom.
Support traditional marriage and the family.
Defend and support Israel.
A voice for the unborn.
People who will defend our republic and secure our elections.
If believers won't step up to the plate and get involved, who will?
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 You know, it's really not about politics or party or politicians or personality. It's about policies and principles that most closely align with our biblical worldview, from the courthouse to the state house to the White House and beyond. Well, there you have it. We've been just doing our best to make sure Christians engage. And you know, we're commanded that in Matthew 5, right? We're to be salt and light. And I just want to know, all those people who say, oh, we don't do that part, how do you become salt and light if you're not engaged in this culture? How do you do it? Because I've certainly had people who, I guess, hide behind the pulpit and they don't want to engage and they think, well, we just don't do politics. My question for them is, do you do Bible? Because it says to preach the whole counsel of God and to tell the truth and to engage the culture. And we're in a hurting world, are we not? And so a little bit of my story, so you know, because I think it's so contextual about how God works in our lives. It's amazing to watch. And I grew up in a little town in South Carolina. Y'all could tell I wasn't from here, probably. And it's a good thing I don't have an accent, but I live in a little tiny town, home of 400 or 500, counting the animals. No kidding. We have a traffic light now, one. Sometimes there's cars there. And grew up in a little slice of Americana. Grew up in church. Gave my heart to Jesus at a church camp when I was 13 years old at Camp Providence in Anderson, South Carolina, where my buddy Brent Armstrong pastored for a while. And so I just never doubted what I believed in. I never had a question to doubt it. You know, I believed in America and I believed in the Lord, and things were going great. I grew up in a home, I tell people I had a drug problem. My daddy drugged me to church and drugged me to youth group. And Dad had a sense of how this is supposed to work, and he's my hero today. If I can be 1/10 of the man my dad's been, then I'll have lived a pretty good life. Went to Clemson, got my degree in engineering, met my college sweetheart, we got married, went in the Army. And it was in the military that I really came face to face with what do I believe in. Any veterans out here, y'all raise your hand if you serve. Y'all give them a hand. Deep bow. Thank you. And my time in the Army, I didn't have to get shot at, thank the Lord, but you start coming to grips with the fact freedom's not free. It's not free. And there are people my age when I went in the Army who died for this thing called freedom. And our country is so awesome that even the people that whine and hate it, they won't leave. I think that's awesome. I think that's really amazing. They won't even go anywhere. Because there's options. How many of y'all been places you just dislike? You know what I do when I go somewhere I dislike? I leave. But we got all these people telling you how bad America is, but they don't want to go anywhere else. And yet there's a long line of folks waiting to get in this place called America. And so all these things are hitting me, and I started studying biblical worldview. You know, really figuring out my God's big enough to be everywhere and everything all the time. There's not a segment in the Bible that says, ooh, don't do that because God doesn't want you involved in that. No. We're supposed to be involved in everything. And so I'm dealing with all this, and I find David Barton stuff, I guess early 1990s, started reading that and realizing God's role in America is, as I said in the video, irreplaceable. You don't have America without God's role in it. So my wife and I decided we feel compelled to get involved in politics. Now I know the original Greek, poly means many, tick means bloodsuckers. I didn't want to do it either. But I felt compelled to get involved and help elect Christians. I started recognizing that Jesus is not running. If Jesus isn't running at any level, then it's the lesser of two evils. You're voting for two people. They're imperfect, they're sinners, they're just normal like me and you. So you can't look at a party or a person, or certainly not a personality. You look at what they stand for. You start analyzing what they believe in. I decided early on that the life issue was going to be what I rose and fall. I'm not going to give up on that. And, you know, I have never voted for a candidate who's for taking a baby's life in a mommy's tummy. Never in my whole life. I figure if they're wrong on life, they're wrong on tax policy or immigration or whatever. And so Michelle and I knock doors, we make phone calls, we wave signs. The boys come along, 97 and 2000. They're basically born with a pacifier in the mouth, a sippy cup in the hand, and a vote for somebody sign. That's what we did. We felt convicted by God that Christians have to be involved and put the best people in office. It was that simple. After that, I get involved in the school choice movement, in the pro-life movement. I was on a board called Pamela Family Council. It's a pro-family group, and we're fighting all these liberal issues that are trying to take over South Carolina. In 2005, my wife, her mom died. It spun her into a deep depression. In 2006, in July, my wife, 18 and a half years, took her own life, committed suicide, left me a single dad with two little boys who were 5 and 9, and saw something nobody should ever see. Interestingly, that day was church. We walked in from church to find her, and I had spoken at Chick-fil-A the week before. On Monday, I did their devotional, which is a great company, and they have people in, and I did a talk on marriage and family. It's so humbling now, because nobody knew my wife's at home with depression. Certainly nobody knew that 6 days later she's going to take her own life. And my boys are sitting over here. The whole corporate office is there. They're really a great company. And I said something I never remember saying. It's just the best stuff comes from the Holy Spirit, not from you. And I said, I've messed up. I've made mistakes. I've even had business failures. But I'm not going to be a failure before God and man with my wife and my boys. And I remember looking at CJ and Bennett. CJ was 9. Bennett was 5. And I remember thinking, that was good. Lord, I'm going to use that again. That was on Monday. On Sunday, we walked in from church to find her. I went through the laundry room and through the kitchen. I really thought it was a stuffed animal, and it was her hair. And she had put a gun in her mouth and pulled the trigger. And in that horrible second, you know, it all happens, right? It's just crazy. And I pushed them away, and I pulled her to me because I didn't want them to see that. And I know there's kids in here. I'm sorry. But I said, go to your room, go to your room. I called 911. I called her dad. Michelle's gone. I called my mom and dad, please come get the boys. And of course, I shouldn't have pulled her to me. That wasn't the best decision probably, but I didn't want them to see that. And so I lay her back down, and as soon as I do, the devil says, ha ha, you failed. In response to what I said just 6 days before. And I felt the Lord tell me this wasn't my plan, but I have a plan for Satan's disruption. And I lay Michelle back down, and Romans 8:28 punched me. And I wasn't reading Romans, I wasn't studying it, but y'all know what the scripture says, and we know all things work together for good of those who love God and are called according to his purpose. So I wasn't studying it, but I had memorized it. I had hid it in my heart as Psalm 119. That was in my reading today. Psalm 119 is just hide scripture in your heart, memorize it. So I had. So I lay her back down, and I don't know about you, but there's been times in my life I read scripture and I wasn't sure what I read, and I had to read it again because I wasn't focused. Anybody can admit to that? That day, it was like one of those scriptures that leaps off the page and grabs you and says, pay attention. I lay Michelle back down and I said, really, Lord, all things? I challenged God. I'm not real proud of it, but I did. All things? My wife's in the pool of blood, all things. And he said, you believe it yesterday? Yes, Lord, I did. He said, I need you to trust me and believe it today. I told him I would. I was a mess. My church was awesome. My family was awesome. My mom and dad were just amazing. But at the end of the day, I'm answering hard questions with little boys that don't understand the logic of doing that. But I was 43 and I didn't understand the logic of somebody doing that. And so I was like, I'm going to trust God. I fainted in the casket room. I had never contemplated picking out a tombstone. Nobody tells you about tombstone shopping. Some of y'all had to do that. It's terrible. And so 3 or 4 months, I couldn't get off the mat. I didn't go to anything. I canceled all my speaking engagements. The only thing I went to was my board meeting for Palmetto Family, but 4 months later. So this is late November, and I walk in the room, and there's a guy there who's now in heaven, but a dear friend named J.D. Martin. And as soon as I walk in, J.D. comes up and says, man, you got to meet this girl. I'm like, J.D., get out of my face, buddy. I love you. What are you talking about, a girl? I'm having a hard time. Can't you see? I wasn't probably super nice to him, and he left me alone to his credit. And the December meeting goes much like that, but he comes up, you got to meet this girl. J.D., buddy, so give it a rest. I don't have time for a woman. I'm having a hard time. And he got in my face. He did what a good Christian brother ought to do. He got in my face. He said, Chad, I've been watching you speak for years. You're Mr. Positive. This ain't going to beat you. He said, you know that talk you do about counting your blessings? Y'all hate it when people use your words against you. Me too. And I said, yeah. He said, go read your notes. I literally wrote down 103 blessings. The boys and I opened the safe of Michelle's stuff a few weeks ago, and I read them for the first time in 16 years. The Lord gave me 3 prayers that I said every day, and one of them was I didn't want a guy in the picture. I never prayed for a widow. I never thought about praying for a widow. I go to the 3rd meeting. Here comes JD. What are you doing, man? I'm having a hard time. You got to meet this girl. Okay, what's her name? He said, Dana. I said, big question, how'd she become single? And he hung his head. And he said, man, I'm sorry, but the same way you did. Her husband committed suicide almost 2 years to the day before my wife. Now, there's a lot more I'll tell you if I speak in church, but I want to get David up here, and I want to tell you the context. 6 months later, we were married. That's 15 years ago. The kids are 25, 22, 21, and 20. I've gotten to watch God work in my life. And we're blessed and highly favored. We walk by faith, not by sight. We got to watch God work. And, you can't change stuff. People make bad decisions, don't they? And we don't always get a vote. It's happening in everybody's life in here. And, something that really strikes me, I was praying about this again this morning. I had to forgive my wife. It was more for me than for her. And there are people we all got to forgive. We can't hold on to that stuff. I mean, she was the love of my life. I'd have never believed I'd have stood here encouraging anybody for anything, anywhere, much less being in Las Vegas, and I'm from South Carolina. But here's what God showed me. He wasn't done with me. And therefore, he's not done with you. He's not done with your church. He's not even done with our nation. And that was a huge encouragement for me. Now, it's not that he needs me or you or America or anything else, but he does give us a stewardship and a responsibility that we're to fulfill. Well, I get back involved in politics, but I ran for state party chairman in South Carolina in 2011. I got elected to that one, and y'all know this, that you're in Nevada, but it goes Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, Nevada, right? So I did every political show on television. On one of those shows, it was the Reverend Al Sharpton show on MSNBC. Pastor Matt, I'm not promoting MSNBC to your people. Certainly not a Sharpton show. But on that show, I was doing my theme of, hey, come to South Carolina, we pick presidents. But I also was beating up the party for minimizing and ignoring the faith vote. And here's kind of the line I have used for years. It's not they want to be R's or D's, but they do want to vote faith values. They do want to know where a candidate stands so they can stand for something that matters. You know, I'll give you an example of it. When Dana and I first got married, she had never done politics, right? So here I am, pretty involved. It's 08. Y'all remember what's happening in 2008. And I taught my boys about, you know, we pull for this team, but we don't pull for that team. Sports analogies are great to do with kids, right? And so we go by a deacon's house in my little town of Newberry. I live in Prosperity, but Newberry is where our church is, at Newberry Baptist. And we go by, and there's a deacon buddy named Mr. Jim. Mr. Jim's in heaven now. And he had the other team's sign in the yard, which is just befuddling Bennett. Bennett was 7.5. Dana and I hadn't been married a year, right? Not long at all. This is 08, like September, and we go by there, and Bennett says, Dad, Mr. Jim's got the other team's sign in his yard. What's wrong with Mr. Jim? I said, Bennett, I've talked to Mr. Jim till I was blue in the face, man. He's just one of those old conservative ones, and hey, he's just wrong on this. He said, now, why don't we like that team? I said, well, there's a lot of reasons I don't like that team, but my biggest one is abortion. He says, what's abortion? Y'all ever been explaining anything to your kids, you realize you should have shut up a couple sentences before? Bennett says, what's abortion? I said, well, that's when they kill babies in mommy's tummies. He says, they what? They kill babies in mommy's tummies? Yeah, they do. So he goes to our little private Christian school the next day, and he decides he should tell some others. And so Bennett stands up in the lunchroom, and he says, we don't vote for that team. And he announced what team, by the way. We don't vote for that team because they kill babies in mommy's tummies, which created some phone calls. And the teacher called the headmaster, who called Dana, who's new to this, who calls me, says, what are you going to do? I said, I'm buying that kid an ice cream cone tonight. He's got this thing straight. he is not confused. But boy, it messed Dana up so kind of bad. And so I was doing Al Sharpton's show, and this is 2012, the presidential thing's going on, and a guy named Reince Priebus sees me do my talk. Y'all know Priebus, he was Trump's first chief of staff, and so he texted me. Now, I knew him, I was one of his 50 chairmen, but I didn't have any kind of relationship. I voted for him. But he texted me, he said, hey, nice job defending your faith on MSNBC. Proud of you. I agree with you. I'm a believer too. I like to get to know you. That's simple. Well, I'd also said on CNN, I thought that Obama's Department of Justice would be the worst train wreck of a disaster for Christians and religious liberty. I'm not a prophet, but I was right. Your tax dollars got used against force and wedding planners and photographers. First time in American history, a Department of Justice had gone after Christians living out their faith. That was a problem. And so I go see Priebus afterwards, and that's why I actually got to meet the Tice family and Mr. Dave or Pastor Dave, and then Matt and Josh and the whole family. But I came out here because I took a job. I got to be the first ever National Director of Faith Engagement from 13 to 17, went all over the country. That's how I met Richard Box, and we came out here. It had to be 2013 or 2014, Matt. I don't remember. But your dad, he'll never know this side of heaven, what an encouragement he was to me that day. Richard Box, same for you, brother. I appreciate y'all. But I got to meet all these awesome pastors. You know, and we didn't try to take credit. All we did was we tell them, can you register everybody to vote in your church? Can you make sure they vote biblical values? We don't need you to charge the beach at D-Day. We don't need you to go down to Trenton on Christmas and attack the Hessians and the Continental Army with no shoes on and bleeding feet. But can you register everybody to vote, and can you teach them to vote biblical values? That's it. We don't have to tell them who to vote for, how to vote. Don't tell them about party or politician. Principles, policies that align with the biblical worldview. Well, we flipped 9 Senate seats in 2014, hadn't been done since Reconstruction, and a guy that was probably not likely to get the evangelical vote set a modern day record because we went right at maximizing the evangelical vote. And I got to tell you, I don't think it's about elections. I think it's about school boards and county councils and city councils because they're taking our kids from us, y'all. Just give your kids, we know better than you do. We'll have mutilation. I won't even go through all that because y'all know what's happening. You know, we see stuff like that. We see drugs coming over the border. We understand there's a whole big slew of things we're concerned with. And to me, what it shows me is Christians aren't involved. When we let that stuff go on, we think to ourselves, we can't make a difference. Well, I left the RNC in 2017 and started Faith Wins. A guy named Dr. David Gibbs. Y'all may know Dr. Gibbs. He's a hero. And he saw me speak at Paul Chappell's church out in Lancaster, California. He said, you ought to do this for yourself. I'll help. And that was 5 years ago. And so we just been raising our own money and going around and speaking. And a couple years ago, I hooked up with this couple, David and Cheryl Barton, because I thought if we can give people the backbone of American history to believe in, then they'll stand for truth and they'll go fight for it. And so we've been all over the place. Like I said, we're wrapping up here in the next couple of weeks what's going to be 132 of these meetings in 24 different states between February and November. Over 30,000 people have heard this talk in some form that you're about to hear tonight. And you're going to be fired up what you hear about it. And I just got to tell you, it moves the needle when Christians engage. We got involved in a little state called Virginia. We found 312 churches to do voter registration. Just like I told you, number one, register everybody. Number two, teach them the biblical values. And 312 churches registered 77,000 people who'd never voted before. They were in the state of Virginia, thought it's too far gone, we can't do anything about it. They had a governor, though, who had applauded when the legislature passed a new law to let babies they tried to abort who survived die comfortably. That's just wicked. And people in churches got fired up. Then they saw what their kids were learning and weren't learning by watching the Zoom, and they got excited, and they said, we're going to do something about this. And our little team ran around the state, and we just talked to churches just like this one and said, get involved, not just about elections, but insert yourselves as Christians into every part of the conversation. It's time we take this country back for God. This is insanity. It's absolute insanity. And normal people know this, but the media acts like we're the extremists because we actually believe life begins at conception and God's ordained it. And we actually believe that there's two genders instead of 142 or whatever comes up this Tuesday. It's absolute nonsense. You know, and it just tells me that our folks aren't present in those rooms when those conversations are taking place. And I grabbed this guy because I tell you, man, if you know somebody knows more American history than David Barton, you need to introduce them to me. I've been hanging out with him a lot. And he knows history. More than that, though, they own 160,000 pieces of original American documentation. 120,000 before 1812. And you're going to see the book, That American Story. I just finished my second reading. You need to read it. You need to read it to your kids and your grandkids because this stuff is not being taught. And if you know some pointy-headed nerd professor who says, well, I think that the founders believed. No. He knows what they believe because he's reading from their source work, their documented diaries and journals and letters, and it's truth. And truth's under attack right now. And if we don't go back and reteach it so that we're fortified, we're losing the country, y'all. We're running around as much as we can. We're just here to tell you we need your help. We need everybody to make sure you register to vote and vote biblical values everywhere, every time. But it's more than that. It's show up at school boards. Maybe it's running for office. Maybe it's going to county council, whatever it is. Christian thought needs to be inserted everywhere. And to back that up, hearing from David gives you the backbone and the information to say, wow, I never knew that. You're going to think to yourself, the first thing, I wish so-and-so was here. And the second thing you'll think is, man, my history teacher ripped me off. Because they did not tell me the truth. So you need to buckle up, hang on tight. You're about to hear from America's greatest living Christian historian, my buddy David Barton.
Thanks, guys. Great to be with you. Thank you, guys. Hey, it's good to be back. Matt, good to be back with you. Matt and I, we had a lot of fun. Matt and family stopped by in Texas, and in Texas, we're out in the country, and we're really fans of recycling. And so we got out a bunch of guns and recycled the lead back in the ground while we all together. It was a lot of fun. So I want to start tonight by going to a report that came out earlier this year, and that report's from the American Bible Society. Now, we often hear from professors and others today that our founding fathers are atheists, agnostics, deists, etc. Well, the American Bible Society stands as a stark contrast to that. It's one of the many proofs. But the American Bible Society started in 1816 by founding fathers, by signers of the Constitution, Charles Kirkwood Pinckney, signer of the Constitution, John Langdon, three Supreme Court justices, started by President John Quincy Adams. So all these political guys started the Bible Society because they knew everyone needed God's Word. So today it exists as the largest Bible society in the world. It gives out 200 million Bibles a year. And every year they do a report on what's the state of the Bible last year. So it came out 2022, and they look back to 2021. And as they look back, you'll see it took a dip on the right side. What they document is that last year we lost another 25 million Americans who no longer read the Bible at all. None at all. This is the lowest level of Bible knowledge we've ever had in American history, recorded history, kept records for 120 years. And so as you examine those records, this is the worst it's ever been as far as biblical knowledge. And that's not a good thing. You know, even Jesus told us back in Matthew 4:4, he said, look, man doesn't live by bread alone. He lives by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God. We have a spiritual being that needs food just like our physical being needs food. And what's happened is, as Americans, maybe better than anybody else in the world, we're going to make sure we get physical food. We're going to get 3 squares a day, no question, but we're not as diligent on getting spiritual food. And if most Americans would make a commitment that says, I'm not going to eat a physical meal unless I've had a spiritual meal, most Americans would have been dead long ago by starvation, because we just don't feed that spirit near as much. So I'm going to challenge you right up front. Get into reading the Bible. Read it at least every day. Remember the Lord's Prayer? Jesus said, here's how you pray. He said, pray for daily bread. So we should have a spiritual meal at least once a day. We need that. But I'm also going to challenge you to memorize Scripture. That's more effort, more work, but there's a good reason for doing that. Let me take you back historically for a bit. Go back to 1787. It's the Constitutional Convention. 55 founding fathers have gathered. And no one's happier about the writing of the Constitution than Ben Franklin. He's the first guy in our history to call for the United States of America. Back at a time when nobody was thinking about being a nation. We were 13 nations. We weren't thinking about being a nation. We were a whole lot like Europe. Europe's been trying for decades to get a European constitution so they can all be one. It won't work. They have too many differences, and that's where America was. We had so many differences. North Carolina did not like South Carolina. They had border wars. Virginia and Maryland had border wars. Every colony had its own money. So if you're going from North Carolina to South Carolina, you got to stop at the border and exchange your money. I mean, we weren't anywhere close to a nation. But Ben Franklin is saying, guys, we need to be a nation. So he did this in 1754, and 33 years later, he's sitting there helping create the United States of America. Now, he should have been happy about it, and he started happy. He didn't stay happy, because all the different colonies came with different agendas. How do you write a constitution? Well, we have the Virginia plan for the Constitution, New York plan for the Constitution, Connecticut plan for the Constitution, New Jersey plan for the Constitution. And of course, New Jersey didn't want Connecticut's plan, Connecticut didn't want New York's plan, New York didn't want Virginia's plan. And so 5 weeks into the convention, it literally is falling apart. 5 weeks of bickering and arguing. You have Alexander Hamilton who said, I got better things to do than fight with the rest of you. I'm going back to New York. George Mason of Virginia, I'm tired of all the bickering. I'm headed back to Virginia. The thing is falling apart. And at that point, Franklin is seated right here. You see Franklin as one of the delegates. The longest speech he gave was on Thursday, June 28, 1787. Now, when Franklin gave that speech, he had given a lot of speeches before this. And the way it worked at the convention for him was he would listen to the debates throughout the day. He would go home at night, think about them, and he'd say, here's what I think. And he'd write out a speech that gave his thoughts on whatever the issue was. When he came in the next day, the speech was delivered, but not by him. He would always give it to someone else and have them read his speech. So he would write out the speech at night and it'd be given. So as you look through the records of the convention, you see a lot of speeches by Franklin, but they were not given by him until this speech. This is the one speech he gave, and it was not written out. He was just frustrated. He's had it up to here with what's going on. It's just falling apart in front of his face, and he's got something to say. Now, we know what he said because James Madison kept the notes of the convention and recorded what this was. So Franklin starts off, and he's just frustrated, and he just tells the other guys, he said, gentlemen, he said, in this situation of this assembly, groping as it were in the dark to find political truth and scarce able to distinguish it when presented to us, how has it happened, sir, that we've not hitherto once thought of humbly applying to the father of lies to illuminate our understanding? He said, in the beginning of the contest of Great Britain, when we were sensible of danger, we had daily prayer in this room for divine protection. Now, the significance of that is that 11 years earlier, this is the room in which they signed the Declaration of Independence. So they were all familiar with this room. He said, guys, we used to be in this room and we used to pray for help all the time. And we did back then. We were not a bicameral system yet. We didn't have a House and Senate. We were unicameral. And that one unicameral system had 3 chaplains for one Congress. And they prayed all the time. As a matter of fact, by the time you get to 1815, there had been 1,400 government-issued calls to prayer in America. We own about 900 of those original calls to prayer. So lots and lots of prayer. He says, guys, don't you remember what we used to pray all the time? He said, our prayers, sir, were heard, and they were graciously answered. He said, all of us engaged in the struggle must have observed frequent instances of superintending providence in our favor. And by the way, he's right. We all saw it. You look even at George Washington. George Washington has over 250 letters where he talks about God's direct intervention. And he goes through, and what he saw with the Battle of Brooklyn Heights and Battle of Long Island, the Battle of Trenton, what he saw in the Battle of Brandywine, what he saw at the Battle of Yorktown. I mean, he goes through, he even told one of his generals, one of the fellow generals who signed the Declaration, Thomas Nelson, he said, Thomas, he said, you and I have been through all these battles. He said, if people have seen what you and I have seen, and if they don't feel an obligation to drop to their knees and thank God, then they're just pagans. They're infidels. They're wicked. And this is Washington. If you don't feel like you should hit your knees and thank God, you're just flat wicked. So they saw God's hand all the time. Franklin continued, he says, and have we now forgotten this powerful friend? Or do we imagine that we no longer need his assistance? He said, I've lived, sir, a long time. And by the way, at this point in his life, Franklin is 81 years old. That's not impressive to us because the average lifespan in America today is 80 years old. However, the average lifespan in 1787 when they wrote the Constitution was 33 years old. So Franklin's sitting there at 81. I have lived, sir, a long time, and the longer I live, the more convincing proofs I see of this truth, that God governs in the affairs of men. He said, if a sparrow cannot fall to the ground without his notice, is it probable that an empire can rise without his aid? He said, we've been assured in the sacred writings that except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. He said, I firmly believe this, and I also believe that without his concurring aid, we shall succeed in this political building no better than the builders of Babel, and we should become a reproach and a byword down to future ages. I therefore beg leave to move that henceforth prayers imploring the assistance of heaven and its blessings on our deliberation be held in this assembly every morning before we proceed to business. Now, I think we can all agree that that is somewhat of a religiously toned speech, a little bit there. I'll also point out, no one disputes the fact that Franklin is our least religious founding father. Oh, that's the kind of rhetoric you get from the least religious founding father? And you're going to claim they're all atheists, agnostics, and deists, and this is what the least religious guy does? Now, the speech you just saw was 14 sentences long. Here's the question I've got for you. How many Bible verses did you just see Franklin quote? Think back over it. The answer you should come up with is 14 Bible verses. These are the Bible verses Franklin just quoted in that speech. Now remember, this extemporary speech, he's just given off the cuff because he's frustrated, he doesn't like what's happening. It just spills out. How in the world did your least religious founding father know 14 different Bible verses? How do we know? Well, Jesus tells us the answer to that question. How did he know it? Jesus says in Matthew 12:34, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. Franklin had memorized those Bible verses. Otherwise, he couldn't have brought them out the way he did. See, this is why the Bible tells us, thy word have I hid in my heart. These guys did serious Bible memorization. I'm going to show you other examples. I'm going to show you what schools did back in the day. And so we were serious about memorizing the Bible. And Franklin, when he got in that period of frustration, just started speaking. And here came 14 Bible verses that he had memorized right out. And by the way, notice that he didn't tell anybody else that he was quoting Bible verses because everybody memorized the Bible back then. Everybody recognized it. Another example I'd point you to is Patrick Henry. The most famous speech that we study of his today is the Give Me Liberty, Give Me Death speech. He gave this in the legislature of Virginia. Virginia legislature at that time met at St. John's Church in Richmond. And what was happening was they're having a discussion of what's happening in America because at that time in 1775, the British had been killing Americans for 5 years. But we're still all British colonies. We're not separating yet. We're just British colonies. But man, is it hard for us because we have a British Bill of Rights to guarantee our rights, but the king keeps violating it and he keeps killing people and keeps taking their stuff and all the stuff he's not supposed to be doing. And so the legislators talking about it said, you know, this is not a good situation because they've got the greatest military in the world. We don't have an army. We don't have a navy. We've got nothing. So as much as we dislike this, we're just going to have to just bear up under it. It's all we can do. And so it's like just accommodate. And at that point, the young legislator, Henry, got up and he was just tatted up to here and he just boiled over and exploded. And we know what he said because there was a guy sitting under the window at St. John's Church listening to all the debates and he wrote down Henry's speech. So Patrick Henry just explodes and it's really a get a backbone kind of a speech. You got to stand up. You got to have some courage. If we'll stand up, God will aid us. And he just goes through it. And it's interesting, if you read his speech, it is 14 sentences. You can get it online. If you read the 14 sentences, the number of Bible verses he quoted in 14 sentences was 11 Bible verses. These are the ones he quoted. And again, this was an extemporary speech. It was not written out. He was just frustrated with what's going on. And he had memorized all these Bible verses and just brought them back. Now, I'm going to point out that even if we do Bible memory work today, it's probably going to be something like John 3:16 or maybe the Roman Road, Romans 3:23. But who in the world today memorizes Deuteronomy 32:4 or Ecclesiastes 9:11 or Jeremiah 6:14? This is what they had memorized. And if I take you to George Washington, he has 100 volumes of writings. He has tens of thousands of letters. And when he became president of the United States, the only president to be chosen unanimously, in 1790, he said, we have a situation in that we have 13 different colonies that are now 13 different states. But they've been independent nations for so long, it's going to be hard for them to adjust to being part of one nation, just 13 states in one nation. He said, I think it would help if I would, as President of the United States, if I would ride to each state and visit the legislature and greet them as president and say, hey, it's really nice that we're all one group now and we've got 13 states. He said, I think if I do that, that'll help reinforce in everybody's mind that we're one nation. And that's a big commitment on his part because he's up in New York City, which is a federal capital at that point in time, which means he's hopping on his horse and he's riding to the Georgia legislature. You know how many weeks that is in the saddle to get down there? And he did that for all 13 legislatures. Huge commitment. So his schedule comes out. Here's the states he's going to visit in 1790. Here's the states he's going to visit in 1791. And in 1790s, he's going into the states. There's a Hebrew congregation in Newport, Rhode Island that hears he's coming to town. And they write him a very effusive letter. And it's like, oh, we can't wait to meet you. What you have done to preserve our liberties and our religious liberties and our freedoms. We just so thank God's raised you up. And it's just a really gushy letter. And so Washington writes back, and he responds to them, and his letter is much more presidential. It's only 2 sentences long. He says, well, thank you for those kind thoughts, and I'm looking forward to seeing you. And it's just a pretty short letter, and it's interesting. In those 2 sentences, he quotes 10 Bible verses in 2 sentences. If you look up these Bible verses, and you can read his letter online, but if you look up these Bible verses, yeah, that's exactly what he said. See, we were accustomed to using the Bible in our rhetoric back at that point in time, but we've become so biblically illiterate today that we have, guys, there's a book out called The Godless Constitution. Anytime somebody tells me the Constitution is godless, they have just told me that they are biblically illiterate. Because I can take you through that document and show you phrases and then have you look it up in the Bible. You go, wow, that's an exact quote out of the Bible. Yes, and that's very common for what they had, but because we're biblically illiterate, we don't recognize it and we impose ourselves on them rather than the other way around. So when you look at these things, Jesus said it, out of the abundance of the heart the mouth speaks. And it's just speech after speech after speech. And these are the guys that built the country. And we've been very blessed in America. As a matter of fact, there's 195 nations at the UN this year. And that number goes up and down depending on who's had a war, who's had a revolution, whatever. But of the 195 nations, I think America, more than any other nation, takes its blessings for granted. We just had them for so long, we just assume they're here. We can change anything we want to, and it's always going to work because we're Americans and anything we do works. It's interesting to see how unique we are because we don't often recognize that. Cornell University Law School had an interesting question. They said, there's 5,800 years of recorded history. There's been thousands of nations. There's been hundreds of constitutions in that period of time. What is the average length of a constitution in the history of the world? Which is a great question. They looked at it, went through all the thousands of nations, hundreds of constitutions. They said the average length of a constitution is 17 years. On September the 17th, last September 17th, we celebrated Constitution Day, our 235th birthday. No other nations come anywhere close to that, but we've had stability for so long, we just take it for granted, and if we do it, it's going to work, and that's why what we're seeing now, we did a lot of polling work. Right now, 75% of college students say they want to get rid of the Constitution, they want to move to socialism. 49% of millennials say we want to get rid of the Constitution, move to socialism. And, just like there's 5,800 years recorded history of constitutions, there's 5,800 years recorded history of socialist nations. We have thousands of nations, hundreds of socialistic nations, and in 5,800 years recorded history, there is not a single instance where a socialistic nation was able to preserve individual freedoms and produce national prosperity. Not a single one. That's all right. If America does it, it's going to work. No, it's not. That's our American arrogance. If we put our hand on the stove, we're going to get burned just like everybody else got burned. Just because we're Americans is not why it works. We had ideas that worked, and those ideas will work anywhere they're used, but a lot of nations have never used them. So in addition to the unique stability that we have, There's other things that make us very different. One is our creativity. If you compare America's creative output to other nations, and how can you make a comparison like that? You can use international copyright, international patent protection. These are things we use to measure creativity. When you come up with an invention, when you come up with an idea or thought, you patent that stuff. And you'll find that America represents 4% of the world's population. And 4% of the world's population should produce 4% of the world's whatever. No, our 4% has produced more than 96% of the inventions in the world. So we are surrounded with so much creativity and technology, we just assume that what we've got is natural and normal. It is not. No other nation's anywhere close to where we are. And even if you look at prosperity, the U.S. Constitution requires that we do a census every 10 years. So we did one in 2020. The results came out in 2021. According to U.S. Census data, where they go house to house to house all over the nation, according to census data, if you live in poverty in America, and we do not want anyone living in poverty, but if you live in poverty in America, your lifestyle is higher than the middle class in Europe, which is the second wealthiest place on the face of the earth. So poverty in America is higher than middle class in Europe? Yep. Which is why right now on the southern border, there are documented people from 129 different nations trying to get into America. If they can just come be poor in America, they've elevated their lifestyle higher than anything they've ever experienced. We just don't understand that. If they can be poor here, that's higher than what they've experienced elsewhere. See, you look at how unique we are and you say, wow, this is different. Who are the leaders responsible for that? Well, a good place to go would be, how about the ones who gave us the Constitution, the Declaration, and the philosophy that we have? I mean, that'd be the George Washingtons. He's the leader responsible. In addition to George Washington, you're going to have John Hancock, and you're going to have John Adams and others, and these are all good names. What I find interesting is John Adams in 1818 got a letter from a guy named Hezekiah Niles. Now, in 1818, John Adams is a really old man. This is 42 years after he signed the Declaration, and he was a middle-aged adult when he did that. So this is a long time afterwards, and Hezekiah Niles is a very young man. He's a millennial of that generation. But he wrote John Adams, and he said, hey, I'm writing a history book on America. It came out in 1822 called Principles and Acts of the American Revolution. We have it, it's a very good history book. He says, I'm writing this book on the history of the United States, and I wasn't there for so much of what happened, but you were. And I want to interview you. I want to ask you some questions that I can include. And so he asked John Adams some questions, and they wrote back and forth. And one of the questions he asked him, he said, I mean, what you guys have given us is so unique. Where'd you get your ideas? Because other nations aren't doing this. And John Adams said, well, we got our ideas from a number of sources. He said, but right up top, you got to put in the Reverend Dr. Samuel Cooper. And of course, there's the Reverend Charles Chauncey, or the Reverend Jonathan Mayhew. He said, and you got the Reverend George Whitefield. And you got the Reverend Charles Chauncey. He goes through and lists preachers. Now, these aren't the guys we study today. We might know a little bit about Whitefield because of the Great Awakenings, but the chances that we've ever studied Cooper or Mayhew or Chauncey, slim to none. And yet this is who John Adams points to and said, this is where we got our ideas. But you see, today we don't study preachers, whether they're white or black. I mean, who in the world is Richard Allen, or who's Absalom Jones, or who's John Moran, or Lemuel Haynes, or who's Harry Hoosier? We don't know. Never heard of those names. Let me just take Harry Hoosier for an example. Harry Hoosier was one of the ministers in the Great Awakenings. And in the Great Awakenings, that's the really big revivals that they had. And back then, at that time of the Great Awakening in America, there was 3 million people in the whole nation, just 3 million in the entire nation. And these great revivalists, and the great revivalists would be George Whitefield and John and Charles Wesley and people like Francis Asbury. These are all famous guys from back then. In a time when our nation had 3 million, these guys could get 30,000 people in a field at one time and preach to them. That is massive percentage of turnout. You know, it'd be like getting millions in a field today, percentage-wise. So they're getting huge crowds. And it's interesting, Francis Asbury, who had those big crowds, he says, well, Harry draws larger crowds than we do. Harry gets bigger crowds than you do? Never heard him before. And then Benjamin Rush, who's a signer of the Declaration. By the way, John Adams said out of the 250 founding fathers, he said the 3 most notable founding fathers, number 1, George Washington, number 2, Ben Franklin, and number 3, Benjamin Rush. No, we don't even know who he is today. I'll tell you about him in a minute. But Benjamin Rush said, I go to Harry's meetings. He said, he's the greatest orator I've ever heard. Now, wait a minute. You're running around with Patrick Henry and those guys, and you're telling me that Harry's a better orator? Yeah. See, Harry's ministry was larger to the blue-collar people of America. These were frontiers guys. They were trappers. They were hunters. They were woodsmen. Wild, rough and tumble guys. They cussed a lot, they drank a lot, they fought a lot. They were just rugged guys. And they loved Harry Hoosier. And a bunch of them got converted. And of course, when they got converted, they didn't cuss as much and didn't drink as much, didn't fight as much, but they're still rugged people, rough and tumble guys. And Harry's ministry was really along the East Coast. He preached in Philadelphia and in Delaware and New Jersey. And what happened was, as America started moving west, as you get to 1806, 1807, 1808, America's moving west. And these frontier guys go west with America because this is what they love doing. They love exploring new stuff. And as they get out there, and Harry's converts came too, they get out there and these other guys look over at Harry's guys and say, wow, they sure act different from the rest of us. What's up with them? And the answer was, they're a bunch of those Hoosiers. Now, it happened to be the Indiana Territory where this was occurring. And I wonder how many people in Indiana know that they were named after a black evangelist. Probably not very many. Now, you would kind of expect that if a guy had a state named after him, he might show up in somebody's history book somewhere, but that's not what we get. See, what we get today is 1619 Project and critical race theory, and it was just a bunch of white guys who did America. Ooh, you know what? That is a bunch of white guys. Oh, by the way, how do we know what they looked like? Because this painting was painted in 1821, decades after they signed the Declaration. Nearly all of them were dead when this painting was painted. So how do we know what they look like? Well, back in the day, if you did something really significant, they took the time, the effort, and the money to do a painting of you. So if you were a governor, like John Hancock, or if you were a general, like George Washington, or if you're a scientist, like Ben Franklin, I'll do paintings of you. So what happened was, this painting was painted in 1821, Jonathan Trumbull. These guys are long gone. There's only 4 or 5 of them still alive. He went and collected all the portraits of these guys. And he did this painting based on looking at the portraits of these guys that they'd had done when they were younger and really famous. Now, the original of this painting hangs in the rotunda of the U.S. Capitol. It's 14 feet high. It is 20 feet wide. It is a massive painting. It's like life-size of these guys. And that's how we know what they look like, a bunch of white guys. Yeah, but the deal is there are so many paintings of all the black guys back then, and we just don't know who they are today. It's not that there's a shortage of paintings. And why would we have done paintings of these guys? Because they were super famous, and they had significant impact on America. And the fact that we don't teach them today doesn't mean we didn't have the history back there. I mean, matter of fact, if you go in the bottom right there, that Jack Sisson, bottom right guy, he's like the first ever SEAL team member. What he did in 1777, the Battle of Newport, was just massive. It's a Hollywood movie waiting to happen. It's cool stuff, but we've never heard the guy at all. Above him is Benjamin Banneker. The top right is Richard Allen. The second from the top right, the guy with the rifle there is Peter Salem. He is a hero of the Battle of Bunker Hill. He got so many commendations that day for what he did in saving so many lives at Bunker Hill. Below him is Harry Hoosier. The second from the right at the bottom is John Chavez. If you go to the very center, the older man there, his name is James Armistead. James Armistead, according to George Washington and General Lafayette, James Armistead is the reason that we won the American War for Independence. He's the first double spy in American history. He fed Lord Cornwallis all the bad information and fed Washington and Lafayette all the good information. That's why we snuck up on Cornwallis and ambushed him. He didn't know what was coming. And so they credit him with winning the American. It would seem like a guy like that we might study in history somewhere. I mean, if no, we don't get these guys. And by the way, go to the bottom left. See the guy on horseback, bottom left? His name is Wentworth Cheswell. He's from New Hampshire. He is a black man elected to office in a white community in 1768. Now, he's a patriot in New Hampshire. He did a Paul Revere-like ride, just like Paul Revere did in Massachusetts. He did one in New Hampshire. But he's elected, black man in a white community, elected in 1768, and he's reelected for the next 49 years. And he held 8 different political positions in New Hampshire. He started the school system there. He is the historian of New Hampshire. Really remarkable guy, but he's not the first black elected in America by a long shot. You got to go all the way back to 1641, where a black man named Matthias de Souza was elected in a white community in Maryland in 1641. He served in the legislature of Maryland in 1641. So you see, by the time we get to the Civil War, the end of the Civil War, there's been hundreds of black officials elected in America, largely out of white communities. By the time you get to 1876, there have been thousands of black officials elected in America. Now, just by contrast, do you know when Great Britain elected their first black official office? 1987. Do you know when Russia elected their first black official to office? 2010. Whoa. 1641 for America, and we're the bad nation in the world? We're the source of all the racism and all the bad. No. That's only can be said if you don't know who we are and if you don't know our history. Why weren't we teaching critical race theory 30 years ago? Because we knew too much of our history. But because we don't know it today, we can teach it today, and people say, oh, I didn't know we were that bad. Yeah, that's because you don't know what actually happened. And so this is part of what goes on. So we're historically literate in so many areas, but going back to the concept of the American founding, you know, if you go back to the early textbooks that we used in classrooms, 1620 was the first textbook ever printed in America, printed in Boston. We have that textbook. For the next several centuries, if you look at American textbooks that we use in the classroom, we consistently tell students that, students, the reason America is different from all other nations is because of the Bible. It's the Bible that made us different from everything else. Now, it would be very hard for most Christians today to defend that statement. Prove it. Well, I can prove it, but there's a lot of ways. Let me just choose one. The way we talk to one another is shaped very much by the Bible. We don't always recognize that, but we have a lot of idioms that we use in the English language, phrases and statements. 257 idioms that we use on a daily basis are quotations directly out of the Bible. I'll show you some. You'll recognize them. You've said them. You've heard them. They're all Bible verses. We're quoting the Bible. When we say things like, by the skin of your teeth, or I'll give you my 2 cents worth, or a leopard can't change its spots, all of these are Bible verses, every one of them. As a matter of fact, even fine arts and literature, if you look at Shakespeare's plays, Shakespeare quotes more than 2,000 Bible verses in his plays. I wonder how many people who reenact Shakespeare on Broadway have any clue they're quoting as much of the Bible as they are. But see, this is what it was. So if you think of things like this, these kind of phrases, fun thing to do, next time you're at Walmart, next time you're at McDonald's, the gas station, you're going to hear somebody use one of these phrases. And when you do, you ought to stop them and challenge them and say, hey, do you know what Bible verse you just quoted? Now, when you did, they're going to challenge you back. They're going to look at you like you're crazy and say, no, I don't know what Bible verse that was. What Bible verse was that? And you won't have a clue either. I mean, we don't know where this stuff came from. See, every one of these has a specific address. If you look up that Bible verse, you'll find that exact language. And the Bible shaped the way we talk to one another. So there's a lot of things I can point to, but I want to go back to some early presidents like John Quincy Adams. I think John Quincy Adams described where we are today. He said it this way. He said, with regard to the history contained in the Bible, it's not so much praiseworthy to be acquainted with it as it is shameful to be ignorant of it. See, we've had a cultural shift in America today. Back then, if you had not known the addresses of those verses, they would have said, shame on you. How can you call yourself an educated person and not know the Bible, the greatest book in the history of the world? So back then, what was shameful today has come praiseworthy. We say, oh, you knew those Bible verses? I can't believe you're such a Bible scholar. You knew that. See, what's praiseworthy today was shameful back then. That's a shift we've had on the Bible. And if you look at a statement from President Zachary Taylor, and by the way, for the next few minutes, I'm just going to give you Presidents of the United States on the Bible, because you'd expect me or Matt to say good things about the Bible. What you don't expect is that for 170 years in American history, it was Presidents of the United States that kept reminding Americans, we won't be the nation we're supposed to be without the Bible. And here's Zachary Taylor, he's a war hero. His nickname was Old Rough and Ready. Zachary Taylor says, the Bible is the best of books. I wish it were in the hands of everyone. He said it's indispensable to the safety and permanence of our institutions. Institutions? What's the Bible have? No, Bible's about our faith. No, Bible's about our institutions. A couple of examples. When the Founding Fathers were creating our form of government, there were 7 different forms of government you could choose from. The Bible has all 7 of those forms of government. Founding Fathers chose to make us a republic. They rejected democracy straight out. Matter of fact, Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution prohibits America from ever becoming a democracy. We have to remain a republic. And even though President Biden in the last 2 weeks have been talking about saving the American democracy and Speaker Pelosi, that's a terrible idea. You want to save the Republic of the United States. We pledge allegiance to a republic. People don't get the difference. Go back to the Founding Fathers. They quoted Exodus 18:21, Deuteronomy 1:15 and 16. Deuteronomy 16:18 is the basis of Republican form of government. It says, choose out from among you leaders of tens, 50s, hundreds, and thousands. Oh, so let's elect local, county, state, and federal. It says, choose able men such as fear God, men of truth, hating covetousness. Try to find elections going in the world at the time the Founding Fathers did it. And actually, we started the Republican forms of government back under the Pilgrims, particularly in Jamestown Colony in 1619. We were doing elections for decades before anybody else was doing in it, and they quoted those Bible verses. And by the way, they said we do not want to be a democracy, and they pointed to several verses in the Gospels where that the Romans were involved, and they said a democracy is the worst form of government ever. It's worse than a dictatorship or tyranny, and they gave the example of Jesus because a democracy means the will of the people. A republic means the will of the law. You pass laws, everybody's under the laws, elected officials and citizens. A democracy, it's whatever the people want. That's what we do. So Jesus rides into Jerusalem the last week of his life. As he comes into town, everybody's throwing down palm fronds and saying, he's the king, he's the king, he's the great Messiah. A week later, they're saying, kill the bum. We want Barabbas. Send Barabbas out. That's a democracy. It can flip in an instant, and it is absolutely undependable, and it is tyrannical. And so that's why they said, we do not want the feelings of the people, we want the rule of law. And so as John Adams said, a republic is a government of laws, not of men. It doesn't matter what the people want, it matters what the law says, and then everybody's subject to that law, and we choose the leaders who make the law. It's a slower process which takes the emotions out of it, at least supposed to, but that's one institution. There's several different economic systems. The first one to use the free market system in the last 1,000 years was America. I can take you to the writings of Governor William Bradford in Plymouth or John Smith in Virginia, etc., and they built the free market system on 5 verses. They built it on 2 Thessalonians 3:10, 1 Timothy 5:8, Matthew 25, Luke 19, Matthew 20. The most prosperous system ever, and it came out of America. We did this 150 years before Adam Smith wrote the 1776 book called The Wealth of Nations. And today, professors say, well, that's where the free market was birthed, 1776. No. By 1627, we already had it fully in place. We had free market businesses running in Aptucket, Massachusetts. That's an institution. It's not just our faith, it's an institution. One more example. If you practice law, there is what's called federal practice and procedure in case you practice federal law. And there's a series of law books that run from here to the wall. And if you'll grab volume 30 out of Federal Practice and Procedure, there's 20 pages that talk about what we call the due process clauses. The due process clauses are the 4th or the 8th Amendment, the right to confront your accuser, the right to have a trial by jury, the right to testify on your own behalf, the right to have all these different things. Federal Practice and Procedure to this day gives 20 pages showing all the Bible verses on which that was based. The right to confront your accuser comes out of John 8:10. The right to compel witnesses in your behalf comes out of Proverbs 18:17. The right to testify in your own defense comes out of Acts 22:1. I mean, that's the federal law book today. Yeah, nobody follows it, but it's still there because that's what the basis of due process was. It came out of the Bible. So he says our institutions. He continued, he said, especially should the Bible be placed in the hands of the young, it is the best school book in the world. I would that all of our people were brought up under the influence of that holy book. Best school book? Doesn't he know that's unconstitutional? He can't say that. Yet this is what we said back in the day. And if I take you to Ulysses S. Grant, he's the President of the United States on the 100th anniversary of America. He's President in 1876, so he came out with a card for young people. You see the top left, it says 1776, birth of the nation. 1876 is 100 years later. It says centennial in the middle. And then it says, message of President Grant to the children and youth of the United States. What is President Grant telling our kids? He says, hold fast to the Bible as a sheet anchor of your liberties. Write its precepts in your hearts and practice them in your lives. He says, to the influence of this book, we're indebted for all the progress made in true civilization, and to this we must look as our guide in the future. Righteousness exalts a nation, but sin's a reproach to any people. That's the president talking to kids. What would happen today if the president said that to the kids of America? See, that's because we don't know our own history. And that's what I'm telling you. I can show you presidents for 170 years. They said more about the Bible in the country than most preachers today say about the Bible in the country. And these were our elected officials. So this is when we knew our history and understood our history. Benjamin Rush, I mentioned him earlier. John Adams said he's one of the 3 most notable founders, so let me credential him. He signed the Declaration, ratified the Constitution, served in 3 different presidential administrations. He's the most famous doctor in American history. He's called the father of American medicine. He trained the first black physicians. He started 5 universities. He's called the father of public schools under the Constitution. He started academic education for women. He started the first abolition society in America, ran the National Abolition Movement, started the first Bible Society in America in 1809. He started the Sunday School movement in America. He was the director of the U.S. Mint. Guy's unbelievable what he did. And that's why John Adams said he's one of our 3 most notable. Benjamin Rush, called the father of public schools under the Constitution, in 1791 did a piece and said, here's a dozen reasons we will never take the Bible out of schools in America. It's the Bible in schools. Benjamin Rush did it in March 1791. We'll never take the Bible out of our public schools. And this is one of his summation statements. He says, the great enemy of the salvation of man, in my opinion, never invented a more effectual means of extinguishing Christianity from the world than by persuading mankind that it was improper to read the Bible at schools. How many Americans have been persuaded it's improper to read the Bible in schools? Most Americans, as a matter of fact, if you want the Bible in schools, have a Christian school, but we don't do that in schools. Yeah, we did. That was public schools, the guy who started public schools, and this is really important that we understood it back then, but we don't now. See, what happens is back then we understood it so well that in 1844, there was a case at the U.S. Supreme Court. That case, 1844, is called Vidal versus George Executives. It came out of Philadelphia. There's a government-run, government-operated school in Philadelphia, and it says, we don't think we're going to teach the Bible anymore. That made the Supreme Court, amazingly. And in an 8-0 unanimous decision, the Supreme Court said, look, if you're a government-run, government-operated school, you will teach the Bible. We're not going to have a government school that won't teach the Bible. A unanimous Supreme Court decision, and they quoted founding fathers all over the case. And by the way, did anybody see this in their history books when they went through school? It's part of American history. No, the history we get is what happened in 1963 in two cases, Aberdeen Shemp and Murray Collette. This is the first time in the history of the United States that the Supreme Court said, we're not going to do prayer and Bible in schools anymore. This is the case in which they took prayer and Bible out of schools. Now, if you read the decision, the court says that taking prayer and Bible out of schools, they said, was without historical or legal precedent. Now, wait a minute. You're saying there's no precedent for taking the Bible out of schools, either historical or legal? Then why did you take the Bible out of schools? Well, if you want to know, you just read their decision. I mentioned I've been involved in 13 cases of the U.S. Supreme Court. We were involved in a case of the Supreme Court this year. We're already involved in a case next year. Just read the decision. And here's what the justices said. They said, if portions of the New Testament were read without explanation, they could be and had been psychologically harmful to the child. What? We've discovered the Bible causes brain damage. We're going to save our kids from brain damage. See, they're just following the science is what they're doing. This is what science has said at the day. Now, I would argue that we've suffered massive brain damage since we've taken the Bible out of schools. Let me just give you one example. I'm a cowboy from Texas. We've got the ranch, I've got the pickup, the horses, the cows, everything that goes with it. And maybe you guys aren't familiar with ranching or don't know how it works, and it doesn't matter. I can take any one of you to my ranch in Texas. I can put you behind the cattle herd, and every single one of you can tell me the gender of every critter that I've got in that cattle herd. It's super easy. And you'll say, oh, there's only two genders. Yeah, and God made them male and female. He says that 4 times. On the other hand, LGBTQIA+ does a lot of corporate training, a lot of woke training. Last month, LGBTQIA+ was doing a lot of training for corporate leaders, and they pointed out that they have now identified 150 different genders in America. You have lost your brains. Exactly. Proverbs makes it really clear that common sense comes from a fear of the Lord. If you don't have any fear of God, you got no common sense, and you're going to do stupid stuff. It goes back to that. See, we were a nation that had a lot of common sense because we had a lot of the fear of the Lord. We taught that. We knew the scriptures. And so this is what we've seen over years and the change we've had. Going back to Dr. Rush, in that piece he did in 1791, he said, the Bible contains more knowledge necessary to man in his present state than any other book in the world. I'll give you 3 examples. This is a guy named Matthew Maury. He was born in 1806. He grew up loving the sea. He joined the Navy. He went to sea as a midshipman. Then he became an officer. Then he became a captain, became one of the best captains in the Navy. And he was ashore one day and was involved in a stagecoach accident. There were 13 people in the stagecoach. The wheel got too close to the edge of a hill, and it rolled off the hill and tumbled down. Everybody's fine except him. It crushed his leg, it broke his pelvis, dislocated his hip. Medicine being what it was back then, they didn't put him back together very well at all, so he was never able to go back to sea again. Couldn't keep his balance, couldn't stand on that leg ride, but he loved the sea. So he took on naval research and started doing all the research for the Navy. He is the guy that we call the father of oceanography because he's the guy who first discovered that there are jet streams in the ocean. And he mapped out the jet streams in intricate detail. Now, by the way, if you doubt that there's jet streams in the ocean, just watch Finding Nemo. It's really clear. Jet streams all over the ocean. But he's the guy who first discovered them. Now think about the technology back then. You got no satellites, you got nothing electronic, no electricity at all. How did he know there were jet streams in the ocean? He tells us in his autobiography. He says he was homesick one day and he asked his family to read the Bible out loud to them. He said they read to him out of Psalm 8. And Psalm 8, among other things, this is what it says. It says, Lord, thou madest man to have dominion over the works of thy hands. Thou hast put all things under his feet, all sheep and oxen, yea, and the beasts of the field, and the fowl of the air, and the fish of the sea, and whatever passes through the paths of the sea. He said, read that again. And he had them read it and reread it and read it and read, because the phrase that just kept popping off the page at him was the paths of the sea. And he wrote, he said, if God said there are paths in the sea, then there are paths in the sea, and I'm going to find the paths in the sea. So he went back and started the research. Now, at the Naval Research Facility where he was, they had 46,000 ship's logs. When a captain in charge of a ship, they go on sailing, morning and night, they will have weather records, and he'll get his astrolabe out, and here's exactly where we are on the face of the ocean, and they tell how many miles they've made and what the average speed has been, etc. He had 46,000 of those ship's logs. He then took, and there are 1,000 pages, some of those logs. He took that, hundreds of thousands of pages, and he went through and plotted every single route of every ship. And he said, you know what? All the ships that were over here got there twice as fast as all the ships over here. And these ships that were over here, it was twice as long or 3 times. And so he mapped it out, and that's where he found all the currents. And so when you look at the map, I mean, it is amazing stuff. It goes which way it flows, and they found that you can get from America to Europe twice as fast if you'll stay over here in this lane because there's a jet stream going. And if you can get there twice as fast, that means you can make twice as many trips, which means your profit is twice as great, which really increases prosperity. But now you're making twice as many trips, you're bringing stuff back, which drops the prices of goods because supply and demand, the more there is, the cheaper it is. So prosperity starts going up for everybody. It had a huge economic impact. And so this is where he found it. It was in Matthew 8. But that wasn't the only verse that he pointed to. Another one was Ecclesiastes 1:6, which says, the wind goes toward the south and turneth around to the north. It whirleth about continually, and the wind returneth again according to his circuits. The wind has circuits? Yeah. And so he started finding out that just like there's jet streams in the ocean, there's also jet streams in the air. And as a matter of fact, in one hemisphere it goes in one direction, the other hemisphere goes the opposite direction. And he got to where he figured out the circuits of the wind and could accurately predict weather. He is called the father of naval meteorology. Oh guys, see those? Don't sit still this week. When the wind's doing that, that's going to be really... Predicting weather back in the mid-1800s. See, scientists for generations considered him the most famous scientist in American history. What he did changed the world, everywhere in the world. And so we built statues to him across the country. Now, we don't know who he is today. We wouldn't recognize the statues you saw him, but it's interesting. Every one of his statues has the Bible right beside him. This is the book where he got his ideas. Greatest science, and I have a presentation I did just on the Bible and science. And if you go back and look at science in the 1400s, 1500s, 1600s, the breakthrough achievements came from verses in the Bible. Circulation of blood and all these different things came out of Bible verses that guys like him read the Bible, believed the Bible. Now, there's others I would point to. This man is James Kent. James Kent is the father of American jurisprudence, and he's the guy who helped develop the use of circuit courts. We know what circuit courts are today because there's the 4th Circuit and the 3rd Circuit and the 2nd Circuit and the 8th Circuit and the 9th Circuit. And every Supreme Court justice is over a circuit. And that's the way it was back then. So Supreme Court justice would have a circuit, and what would happen is rather than everybody going to D.C., the judge would go to his circuit and write it. So there was a Supreme Court justice that had the circuit of South Carolina. And every year he would ride down to South Carolina, go all over the state holding court in South Carolina. We didn't all go to D.C. for court. They went to where we were. You had a judge that his circuit was Massachusetts, and one was Maryland, and one was Virginia. So the idea of circuit courts, and we still call them that today, even state courts we call circuit courts, but it's not what it used to be. And you try to find a circuit court in other nations, that's really hard to do. This is an American innovation. What's a circuit court and where did we find it? Well, according to the guy who helped start it, he said we found it in 1 Samuel 7, 15 and 16, because in the Bible it says, and Samuel judged Israel. And Samuel rode the circuit from Gilgal to Mizpah to town after town after town. So he's a judge. He goes to the people. He rides from town to town and holds court from town. That's a great model for America, which is why we did what we did. We still call them circuit courts, but we don't do what we used to do back then. But that's a biblical innovation. Even the healthcare system. The first healthcare system in America started by Ben Franklin back in 1751. First hospital, Pennsylvania Hospital. Why did he do a hospital? Why did he start that? Because he said he found that in Luke 10:35. See, we just go through so many institutions, they come out of the Bible. And this is what we understood back in the day, and that's what President Roosevelt said. He said, in the formative days of the Republic, the directing influence the Bible exercised on the fathers of the nation is conspicuously evident. Is it really? How many of us, it was evident when we went through history? It hadn't been evident since World War II, but remember, this is World War II president. And by the way, he's a secular, progressive, liberal Democrat. And he's saying, guys, it's all about the Bible. See, nobody in America disputed that back in that time. Now it's really polarized. Not back then. Nobody doubted what the Bible did. He continued. He says, we cannot read the history of our rise and developments of the nation without reckoning with the place the Bible has occupied in shaping the advances of the Republic. It was just unquestioned. Nobody questioned that at all. Going back to Benjamin Rush, he said the Bible, when not read in schools, is seldom read in any subsequent period of life. Well, that's turned out to be true. We now have the highest illiteracy rate we've ever had. As a matter of fact, right now, only 9% of Christians read the Bible on a daily basis. So I was talking about having a spiritual meal every day. Of those professing Christ, only 1 out of 11 actually does a daily Bible reading, and only 6% have a biblical worldview. In other words, only 6% can put a Bible verse beside a policy. For example, if I said, what did Jesus say about the minimum wage? You should say Matthew 20. That was easy. Most people don't have a clue the Bible said anything about minimum wage. What did Jesus say about the capital gains tax? Oh, that's easy. He has a whole parable in it in Matthew 25 and Luke 19. Really? See, that's a biblical worldview, being able to apply the Bible to all the things that Jesus talked about, whether it's criminal justice or anything, because Jesus is the one who gave us the right to confront our accusers out of John 8:10. Even the federal law books point to that. So there's so much back there, and so we really do need to know the Bible. Going back to John Quincy Adams, I used a quote from him earlier. John Quincy Adams had 70 years in public life. The guy was a U.S. Senator, 17 years in the House of Representatives. He was a foreign ambassador to 5 different nations. He's Secretary of State. He's U.S. President. The guy, I mean, just busy for 70 years of his adult life. And when he was overseas as a diplomat to the court of Catherine the Great in Russia from 1811 to 1813, back home, his kids were being raised by his brother because they couldn't go with him to Russia. So they're being raised by his brother, and he's concerned about them. And so he writes his 10-year-old son, George Washington Adams, and he writes him 9 letters. He says, George, he said, you're 10 years old. You need to know that in America, we read the Bible from cover to cover once every year, and you're 10, and you need to be doing that. And so in the 9 letters, he said, now as you read it, here are the big themes that you look for. Here's the things you need to know. He gave him kind of a Bible survey course on how the Bible, what the key teachings are. And so he's telling his 10-year-old son, you got to read the Bible cover to cover once a year. That's what we do in America. Well, what happened was decades later, people found out about those letters and said, hey, we want that for our kids. And so it became a book in 1848. It's called The Letters of John Quincy Adams to His Son on the Bible and His Teachings. It went through reprint after reprint after generation after generation used it. Even today, it's available online. We have it as an ebook that you can download. So this is what we use to give guidance for generations over. Here's why you read the Bible cover to cover once a year. And by the way, if that's not your practice, let me challenge you to make that your practice. Read through the Bible from cover to cover every year. If you've never done it, say, okay, when I come back a year from now, I will have done it. It's easy. 3.2 chapters a day, 15 minutes a day. You can read the Bible from cover to cover every year. The greatest book in the history of the world. It's shaped America more than any other book. It's worth reading. Now, he spent a lot more time in it. He spent an hour a day in it, and that was as president and everything else. And so he talked about how that as he would read the Bible every year, and his diary, he started a diary when he was 11 years old. He kept it until he died at 80 years old. In his diary, he shows what the Lord shows him. The Lord speaks to him as he reads the Bible. And at the start of each year, he would say, I would always try to find a theme for the year. He said, so as I'm reading the Bible this year, I'm specifically looking for every verse I can find that deals with banking and finance. One year, as I read the Bible this year, I'm looking for every verse I can find related to criminal justice and due process. He would always look for something practical. So this is what he told his son. This is what we taught in generations in this book. He says, no book in the world deserves to be so unceasingly studied and so profoundly meditated on as the Bible. He said, I myself for many years have made it a practice to read through the Bible once every year. He says, I've always endeavored to read it with the same spirit which I now recommend to you, that is, with the intention and desire that it may contribute to my advance in wisdom and virtue. I don't read the Bible like a spiritual devotional. I'm not looking to get blessed. I'm looking for something that'll challenge the way I think, my wisdom, that'll challenge the way I act, my virtue. I'm always looking for application, and that's what they did. Now, this is for his 10-year-old son, which we would say that's 3rd and 4th grade. So let me take you back to what we did even earlier that in schools. And I'll point out that every state in the United States has very, very extensive government records over the schools in the state, how many kids were in school which year, what the curriculum was, what they were tested on, and you guys will have it as a territory, you'll have it as a state. The first public school law passed in America was the colony of Massachusetts in 1647, but Massachusetts became a state, and they have it for every year. Every state has it for every year. So I just picked a state, I chose New Jersey. And I want you to see public schools in New Jersey in 1816. This is the state report for the public schools in New Jersey in 1816. This is what the report says. It says, all the scholars of the 1st and 2nd classes, so we're talking 1st and 2nd grade, commit to memory portions of the New Testament or Psalms, a lesson of the catechism, several hymns, and the text of the preceding Sabbath. Wait a minute, all the 1st and 2nd graders, they're memorizing the Bible and Psalms and what are the texts of the preceding Sabbath? Really easy. Whatever Matt talked about last Sunday morning, every verse he mentioned, we're going to memorize that verse. So that's the text of the preceding Sabbath. Now, New Jersey pointed out they did have some kids that were sharper than other kids, which that's no surprise to anybody. And they talked about one of the sharp kids. They said, one of the scholars has committed to memory the book of John and the first 30 Psalms together with the 119th Psalm. First grader? Yeah, but he's the smart dude. They weren't all that smart. It says, the majority have committed to memory the Gospel by John. All the 1st and 2nd graders memorized the Gospel of John. Now, one kid was so smart, he actually added 30 Psalms and Psalm 119, but everybody memorized the Gospel. I don't know that I've ever met a Christian in my life that's memorized the Gospel of John. And this is public schools in New Jersey in 1816. And I can take you through the state records from any state and show you that this is what was common, which is why when the court took the Bible out of schools in 63, as they said, it was without historical or legal precedent. There's no reason for taking it out because of the way the nation was built. So Dr. Rush, he said the Bible not read in schools is seldom read in a period of life. This is why we have a high biblical literacy right now. And that shows up in our worldview on things like God's institutions. We recognize that God created 3 institutions. The first is that of the family. Really simple. We know that Genesis 1, 2, 3, God made Adam, God made Eve. They had kids. God said, this is good. Bless the family. That's the institution. The second institution is that of civil government. And what happened with civil government starts right over there with that dude, Cain. Cain and his rock. Genesis 3 and 4, Cain murders his brother Abel. Now, if we would have just had rock control laws back then, we wouldn't have had that problem. It would have been all different. If God would have given us rock control laws, there would have been no murders going on. Oh, wait a minute. Jesus told us in Matthew or in Mark 7 that all crime comes out of the heart. Murder, it's not what's in your hand, it's what's in your heart. If you can't control the inside, you'll never control the outside. But what happened was back in Genesis 4, when Cain killed Abel, then it goes downhill from there. And the whole world gets into murder and rape and pillage and theft. And God says, okay, let's just wipe it out with a flood and start again. And so Genesis 9 is when Noah gets off the ark. Noah is the new start. We're having a reset, and this is Noah. And God gives Noah 7 civil laws. They're called the Noahide laws. Whether it's secular history or religious history, there's no government formed before Noah got those 7 laws. And those 7 laws, God said, Noah, here's what you do to murderers. Here's what you do to thieves. They go right through, seven laws. That's the first instance of civil government. It came directly from God. He gave it to Noah and said, here's how the world's going to run. So God is the one who established civil government. And the third institution we would point to would be the institution of the church. A lot of examples in the New Testament, but probably the earliest one back in the Old Testament, we would probably say would be Exodus. Because Exodus, God says, okay, I want the congregation together, and here's how the congregation worships in my temple. So collective worship, not individual. Now we're having a body come in. That's the type and shadow for the church. So of those 3 institutions, Christians today are really pretty good with stuff on the family and stuff on church, but we're not very good with stuff on government. And it was not always that way, because government, that's secular stuff. We don't do secular stuff. If you go back to the American founding, political science professors at the University of Houston have documented that the single most cited source when we wrote the Declaration of Independence, single most cited source was John Locke's book called The Two Treatises of Government. That book came out in 1690, but the Founding Fathers used that to help draft the whole principle of the Declaration. Matter of fact, Richard Henry Lee, signer of the Declaration of Virginia, is the guy who made the motion in Congress that we should separate and be a separate nation. It led to the Declaration. Richard Henry Lee said, quote, "We copied the Declaration out of Locke's Two Treatises of Government." Oh, so this is the basis of how we got our government formed? Yeah. Now this book, 1690, we have one of the early copies of it, and it's less than an inch thick. It's less than 400 pages long, but you can get it today. It's been reprinted. It's easily available. If you will read Locke's Two Treatises of Government, you'll find that he references the Bible more than 1,500 times on how government's supposed to operate. If you ask most Christians today, give me some Bible verses on government. 2, 3, 4, 5, 1,500? Nowhere close. See, we don't understand how biblical this institution was. It was created by God, and we used to understand that and know that. And so what happens is, as a result of knowing family and church and not government, we become kind of two-thirds Christians. We're involved in two of three of God's institutions. We've got to get back involved in government. That's the one we've left out. It's one of God's institutions. We've got to become three-thirds Christians, get involved in all of those different arenas. Now, that means that when you see this, going back to Benjamin Rush said, and by the way, I told you he's called the father of public schools. The reason he was called that was the piece he did in 1790. I showed you the 1791 piece, dozens of reasons would keep the Bible in schools. The 1790 piece he did is called On the Mode of Education Proper and a Republic. He said, now that we've become one nation instead of 13 nations, what do we need to be teaching in our schools to keep us unified as a nation? And so he goes through and he says the purpose of public education is threefold. He said the number one purpose of public education is to teach students to love and serve God. He said the number two purpose of public education is to teach students to love and serve their country. The number three purpose of public education is to teach students to love and serve their family. If you look at that order, nearly every Christian I know would say, no. It should be God, and after God, then it should be family, and then it should be country. And he said, no, you're wrong. It should be God, and then it should be country, and it should be family. And we say, well, no. He explained. He said, if you ever lose control of your country will become the great enemy of your family. So if you want to protect your family, you've got to stay involved in your country, and we're seeing that. If you didn't see it a week ago Monday, Newsom came out with this bill signed in California. Newsom signs a bill that removes children from parents who oppose transgender treatments. Really? You're going to take my kids away? Yep. And then you also have what up in Washington State now doing a health clinic in every school so that kids can transition, kids can get gender transition drugs, kids can do abortions if they're pregnant, and kids can get birth control, and parents will never be told. We'll never let the parents know, really, this is what the schools in Washington are doing. And then this one recently, a teacher fired for refusing to promote same-sex marriage to kids. Wait a minute, I sent my kids there to learn how math works. No, you weren't promoting same-sex marriage, and so we have to fire you. See, this is where the state has become the great enemy of the family. And we've seen this all over the nation. This is why there's been so much attention to schools. It's turned out that in the last 3 years, we figured out schools are real cesspools of what's going on across the country. We didn't know a lot of this stuff was going on, and that's why there's so many people focused on school boards now. Now, school boards, that's local elections. And when you look at elections in general, in America, to vote, three requirements, 2 constitutional, 1 statutory. To be a voter in America, the Constitution says you got to be 18 years old and you have to be a legal citizen. So if you can meet those two, 100% of people who meet those 2 standards can vote. The third is a statutory standard, and it says, well, register to vote, because we want to make sure you don't vote twice or somebody doesn't vote 7 times for you or whatever. So just register to vote. This is where it starts falling apart. Of all the adults that are eligible to vote, only 65.3% have registered to vote. That includes 100 million Americans who have said, I'm checking out, my vote doesn't make a difference, or I can't make a difference, or I don't care what happens. 100 million Americans have no ability to impact the civil process. That includes 40 million evangelical Christians. And can you imagine how different the nation would be if those 40 million evangelical Christians were to realize and recognize that government is God's institution? We need to be involved in that as we are in family or church or anything else. And so specifically, there's two types of elections in America. One is what we had 2 years ago, presidential elections. This is the highest voter turnout. Over the last 11 presidential elections, the average voter turnout has been 54% of registered voters, not adults. That's 54% of 65%, which means only 36% of American adults vote for president, and it takes half of that to win. The elections we're having this year are called off-year elections. This is when we choose governors and U.S. senators and state and federal legislators. And the last 21 off-year elections, our average voter turnout has been 38%. But that's 38% of registered voters, which is 38% of 65%, which means 26% of adults vote for governor and senator, et cetera, and it takes half that to win. So what we're looking is in the last 11 presidential elections, 1 out of 5 Americans has chosen the president of the United States, 4 out of 5 did not. And 1 out of 8 Americans has chosen our governors and our senators and our legislators. 7 out of 8 did not. And when you go to the local level, the average turnout is 6%. But that's 6% of 65%, which means 4% of adults vote, which means you can win with half of that, 2%. Give you an example. If you go to Los Angeles, the second largest city in the nation, the population of the city of Los Angeles is larger than the population of 23 separate individual states. So if you're Eric Garcetti, who's the mayor of Los Angeles, that's like being a governor in 23 states. Now, Eric Garcetti, when COVID broke out, everything was pretty much okay except churches. They're not essential. Pot shops are okay, and liquor shops are okay, and big box stores are okay, but churches, no, definitely not. Garcetti brags about the fact that he was elected mayor of Los Angeles with 2.9% of the vote. There's enough churches in Los Angeles to have anybody they want for mayor, except they're not engaged. If you go to my state of Texas, Houston, 4th largest city in the nation, Houston is larger than the population of 20 separate states, and they elected Anise Parker mayor. She was elected with 3.3% of the vote. She's the first open lesbian mayor elected in Houston, and when she got in, she passed a city law that says if you say that marriage between a man and a woman, that is a hate crime, and I've got you. So she went after a bunch of pastors called the Houston Five. She subpoenaed 17 different forms of communication. She said, pastors, I want to see all your text messages, all your voice messages, all your emails, all your social media. I want to see all your sermon notes on your computer. Went 17 different forms of communication. She said, if I find that you've said marriage between a man and a woman, I have got you. That is now a crime in Houston. There's enough churches in Houston to have anybody they want for mayor, and they had Anise Parker. Matter of fact, I can name 10 churches in Houston right now that I'm friends with that have enough people in their church to have won that election. Easy. And there's thousands of churches in Houston. So we've not been engaged in it, and what happens is we're starting to see that we're getting re-engaged. Chad mentioned earlier about Virginia and what happened there, and we go in and organize 312. There's tens of thousands of churches in Virginia. Yeah, 312. Organize 10 different house districts. End up winning. We got 77,000 people who had never before voted, and these are Bible-believing churches. None of them were mega churches. They're all community churches. Got 77,000 people registered to vote. Not only was that the margin of victory for the governor, who won by 65,000, but we ended up picking up 9 out of the 10 state legislative seats in those 10 districts. Now, that's... But it doesn't stop there, because 2 Timothy 2:5 says you cannot be crowned a winner if you don't run according to the rules. What are the rules of elections? Don't have a clue. Why don't we find out? 1,343 people out of those 312 churches said, we want to know what the rules are. They got involved in elections as poll watchers, as election judges, and in that capacity, they said, hey, we want to see all the new voter registrations for the last week. It's public record, and we want them every week. We want to see who registered to vote last week. And so they just started going through the voter registration list. They found 5.2% of the voters were fraudulent. One guy registered to vote in 27 different locations. There was a cow pasture where 17 people voted out of the cow pasture. They drove out there to see it. There wasn't even a barn on it. It was just a flat field. 17 people voted out of there. So when they started putting eyes on the process, all of a sudden you start finding there's a lot of cheating going on here. Nobody was looking before then. They started looking. If you take 5.2% of the fraudulent vote out, that'll win an election for you. And see, that's what they started doing. And we're actually seeing that going not just there, but other places as well. Chad mentioned there's 8 states that we're particularly focused on right now. Michigan's one. We were there last week. And looking at vote stuff there, it's interesting. Same thing. We want to see the new voter registration list, and they come in sheets of 100. And so as they're going through, they come on a guy named Jason Daniel. And it turns out they find that Jason Daniel, checking his voting record, he voted twice in 2020. Now, that's not good, but that's not the story. The story is Jason Daniel was born in 1850, went through the Civil War, and voted twice in 2020. Really? And what's interesting is the Secretary of State in Michigan is fighting to keep all the dead people on the voters' rolls. She's got 35,000 dead people that we know of on the voters' rolls, including 20,000 who have been dead for more than 20 years that she won't take off the voter. Why is she doing that? Well, I guess if they can all vote twice, that's another 70,000 votes you can get. See, this is where getting Christians showing up exposed. One sheet of 100 different names on Michigan voter roll. The top 67 had all been dead for a long time. So just got obituaries and tagged beside each one, took the voter office, say, this dude voted, but he's been dead, and here's his obituary. So that wasn't happening until Christians got involved. You see, we're told to be salt and light by Jesus in Matthew 5, but if you recall over in Ephesians 4:13, he talks about light is what drives out the darkness. Simply showing up as light makes a difference. When these 1,343 people said, we want to show up and watch the elections, there were 3 county election clerks in Virginia that quit just because someone was going to be watching the elections. Now that should be a red signal when you get that. That should be a red flag. Just because somebody's watching, you're quitting. And as it turns out, one of those was just arrested by the new attorney general that was elected with this new wave that came in because there was cheating going on. So don't mind getting beat in an election if it's straight up. I hate losing in a cheating election, but this is nothing new. See, this is from 1864, Harper's Weekly. These are guys going around to the gravestones, taking off the names of dead people so they can vote in the next election. There has always been voter fraud, and there always will be, because there are always people who are not God-fearing, who don't believe the answer to God. There are always people who believe the end justifies the means. There are always people who believe my team should win at all costs. And so there's always going to be voter fraud, because you've always got people involved, which is why Christians need to be engaged as salt and light. So showing you some state stuff, let me finish with just some local stuff. This is out of Minnesota. Churches got involved in Minnesota and took school boards back in Minnesota. Minnesota is a wacky blue state. They are crazy up there. And yet churches finally said, we're going to show up. And now they're winning school board elections. And this one in Denver and these in Colorado Springs. 1,500 churches got organized in Colorado. They took 78 school boards in Colorado, including the Denver School Board, including all 4 school boards. All 4 school boards in Colorado Springs. That's the 2 biggest cities in the nation. Think of the different educational philosophy that you've now got going, because you got Christians in leadership. And it's going to take them a while to root this stuff out, and there's going to be crazy teachers they got to deal with. But at least somebody's working on getting it better at this point. You have the same thing in Wichita. 3 out of 4 there, churches got involved. Churches got involved up in Boise, Treasure Valley. Boise's the craziest town in Idaho, and churches got involved, took the school board there. If you go to Dallas, in Dallas, interestingly enough, there were 51 churches that got engaged. And those 51 churches on election day won 15 out of 15 school board seats in Dallas. They took every one of them. They got their candidates in. Houston did the same thing. Churches got organized there, and they took every school board seat in Houston, and that's 2.3 million people in that city. I mean, that's a massive impact. And in Fort Worth, churches got organized there. They took 20 out of 21 school board seats in Fort Worth. If you go to Miami-Dade County 6 weeks ago, they took 25 out of 30 in Miami-Dade County. Churches are starting to stand up and get involved in this stuff, and that will make a difference for millions of kids in America. You see, you don't have to be a Christian to benefit from the Bible. Franklin wasn't a Christian, but he was a huge advocate of the Bible because of what it did for creating a civilized society, a prosperous society, a safe society. I mean, there's just, it's clear. You don't have to be a Christian to benefit from the teachings of the Bible. Now, you want to be a Christian because you want to spend heaven and you want to spend eternity in heaven with Jesus. You don't want to spend it in hell. That's a personal thing, but for a national standpoint, having a biblically based nation makes the safest, most prosperous nation that you can possibly have. And that's what we understood. And that's why we get involved in civil government. So with all that, the challenge for tonight is become a 3/3 Christian. If you've had reticence to get involved in the civil arena, that is God's arena just as much as family or church. But also get into reading God's Word. Try to go through the Bible once every year and memorize Scripture. I mean, memorizing Scripture is really good. I don't know, who knows? Maybe someday we can be as smart as those first graders in New Jersey back in 1860. That'd be pretty cool. If this stuff is new for you, we have at the back a book called The American Story, which is loaded up with this kind of history that we haven't heard in a long time, but we have those original records, and so we can bring it out. The same thing as the Founder's Bible. It shows you the Bible verses the Founding Fathers used for creating different institutions and due process and all the stuff we talked about tonight. Chad, back to you, sir.
David Barton. Now, I know y'all knew most of that. It's really amazing, isn't it, to hear him? And I tell you, he's going to run out of material in about 8 or 10 more hours. So if we keep him talking, I know you want to get that book, Beat Feet, back there. I don't know if we have enough, but The American Story. Read those stories to your kids and grandkids. They're not getting this. And what I love about it, I just finished my second reading a couple months ago. Short chapters that are backed up with footnote and fact and actual documentation. The Founder's Bible. You want to see how the founders came up with the stuff and they connected to the dots in the Bible? It's in that Founder's Bible. We use that with our kids. We're going to use it with our grandkids one day when we have them. This is big time stuff that has been lied about, covered up, and glossed over. Don't you think if people heard all these stories of Americans of every stripe, they'd be so proud of this nation? And there are people dedicated to dividing us. That's what they're committed to. And until we put Christian involvement in every place, God-fearing people, flag-waving, patriotic, God-loving people, just getting involved and saying, I've had enough. And so I got to tell you, I wish I could tell you as a former state party chairman that we had this plan in Virginia for the poll watching. We stumbled into it. And what we did was we put up this QR code. We think it's one of the most patriotic, God-fearing things you can do in America. How many of y'all are worried about elections a little bit? You're just concerned about it. And so what we did was we started recruiting poll watchers. Not because, we thought anything went wrong. My time machine doesn't work. I can't fix that. What I can do is put God-fearing people in the process to just have eyeballs on it. That's it. And we literally did stumble into it. And we created the QR code. I know if you're over 12, nobody understands QR codes. But if you hold your phone up, your camera, you got to go to the camera feature and hold it up to that. It'll take you to a website. It'll give us your email. We won't bug you. We don't have time for that. I promise you. What we will do is we've got one guy. Where's Jesus? Jesus, there he is. I see you back there with the lights, brother. Jesus is our Nevada guy. And either he or one of our pastors will be in touch with you. And all we're trying to do is put you by precinct and county in the right place. And I don't have all the states memorized. Some of them, you got to be a county voter to be a precinct watcher there, or a poll watcher or a poll worker. Other states, you just got to live in the state. Some of them, you got to live in the county. So we will match you up. It is one of the greatest things you can do. Take your camera phone, go to that, and it'll take you to a website, and you put your email address in. Somebody on our team will get in touch with you and make sure we got a bunch of Bible-believing Christians who are involved in this process. I can't tell you how honored David and Cheryl and I are to be here. We love your pastor. We love your leadership, love your family. Thanks for leading. We need you. And hey, we can't do it alone. We need you. Hit that QR code. Get involved. Let's take this country back for God. Thank y'all for having us.
If you were blessed tonight, would you just say amen? And thank you so much for being here tonight and ministering to people in Las Vegas and flying back across the country. I'm just so blessed to have you. Can I just tell you, I want to recognize the folks who felt that it was important enough to hear about our American history, who have taken that step, that plunge to run for office. And I'm going to just have them stand for a few moments so you can see them. I know of 3, and if there's another one, I want to make sure I recognize you. First of all, Kelly Quinn. Where is Kelly Quinn? This is Kelly Quinn. If you live on the southwest part of the valley near like Russell and Alta and Rainbow to Wallapai, he would be a person I would want to talk to if I were you. We've never met before, but you're glad you came to Liberty Baptist Church, aren't you? Yeah, see, I knew he would say that. Yeah, we're sure glad you're here. Kelly, thank you for coming tonight. And then my friend Jacob. Jacob, would you stand? This is Jacob DeVille. And if you live over in the Desert Shores area, in the Summerlin Desert Shore area over here, Jacob and I have been friends for about 6 years, and really appreciate this guy. Has a heart for the Lord, and I would get to know him if I lived over in that area. So thank Jacob for being here tonight. And then I want to make, did I miss any other assembly candidates? Okay, last one I want to meet. Sam, would you just stand for a second? So this is Sam Peters. And Sam and I are great friends, aren't we, Sam? We have been friends for how long? Sunday. 3 days, yeah, we've been friends for 3 days. And for months I've been trying to get in touch with Sam and try to connect with him, and somebody gave me his number and it was the wrong number and one of the digits was messed up. And so I was driving home after Harvest Fair, which, by the way, there were 14 people that prayed to receive Jesus Christ as their Savior here Sunday at Harvest Fair. So I was driving home from Harvest Fair just like celebrating what God had done, and I looked over at this guy hanging a Sam Peters sign. I'm like, that's Sam Peters. So I drove over and pulled up behind him. In his car, he was listening to Christian music on the radio. And I just thought, this is a guy I want to get to know. Sam is running for Congress in this district, and if you live north of here, he would be my congressman. If you live north of here, over into North Las Vegas, and probably as far west as this district goes, that's a guy I would get to know. And we are dear friends of how many days again, Sam? 3 days. That's exactly right. So I appreciate Sam being here tonight. They mentioned that there are materials out in the lobby, and those things will go quick. One of the best $20 you'll spend tonight is buying that American history book. I have one, and it's a great asset and a help to me. In fact, some of the stuff we've been covering on Wednesday nights, we've been covering because of that history book. I hope you'll take advantage of meeting the Bartons. Thanking Chad for being here. Why don't we close? Pastor Box, would you please come on up here and close our service with a word of prayer? And as soon as he says amen, grab your kids and go home and bring them to school tomorrow.
Amen. No, I'm just playing. Let's all stand. Woo! Oh, Father, thank you for this opportunity to gather together as your people, and thank you for your grace upon those who have spoken and filled us and encouraged us to go and to be salt and light in such unique times. Father, these are your Hoosiers. These are your people, God. These are those who you have called to be salt and light in the places of influence that you have given them. And so, Lord, encourage us, allow us to be your mouthpiece, allow us to give a reason for the hope that lies within us with fear and trembling. And we thank you for this opportunity to be so filled this night. God, would you go with us? Would you lead us and guide us? And traveling mercies upon everyone in this room, especially those who will be flying out. And we thank you for this amazing church, for the amazing leadership here. And we pray continued influence and blessing upon this place. In Jesus' name, amen.